you so much, Renee. And it's so good to be here with everybody. Yeah. I think I'm going to share my screen now so that we can start looking and thinking about Renee's work in the context of Riffs and Relations. But before Renee and I start our wonderful and delightful conversation, I want to talk a little bit about the exhibition, and I'm glad that the first Renee has given us some context for it. But Riffs and Relations, I was thinking about how have African-American artists position themselves in relation to this powerful history of European art, right? And it is a force that has, and not just European art, European modernism, it's a force that has really defined 20th century art, globally. And so why, and then another thing that it was very important to kind of think about as we're putting this together, why isolate African Americans in this? Because most 20th century artists engage with modernism in some way or react to or against it. But Black artists have had a very public and sustained engagement with modernism since the early 20th century, and really has grown up with African-American art in the 20th century is really a modernist project, has grown up with that. So many early Black artists that are in the show are really modernist. But then when you come to the postmodern, right, era, if you will, Black artists like Renee Cox began to dismantle these hierarchies and think about modernism, think about art history and its power differently, and sort of question their place in it. And Renee will talk about more what she was thinking about it, but began to question this old boy network and expose its reliances on exclusion and sometimes stereotype. And so her work sort of addresses that directly. And so she was really one of the early architects of this resistance when it comes to thinking about art history. And so she's in particularly kind of forerunner for many of the young Black women photographers. I mean, she's like she says, calls them she's the godmother to many of them who we think of in this field. And so we have some of them in the show that we can look at. So with that dynamic in mind, I take you to the opening room of Riffs and Relations. And we wanted, and I was the curator, but my colleague Renee at the museum wanted the exhibition to begin with the bang. And in no small part, this was helped to be achieved by Renee Cox's work. When you walk up the stairs, many of you who've been in this Phillips collection, you see this work as soon as you hit the gallery. It's right there on the other side of the title page, the title and the text. And then we have the famous, infamous Bob Colescott and Carrie Mae Weems, all three addressing the same theme, all three relating to Benet's Luncheon on the Grass. And so I wanted this room to kind of look at that theme, and it'll help people when they come into the show kind of understand what do we mean by a riff. And start to really understand what the entire show will be about. So, Renee, I'm going to invite you into this. This is what we're talking about in terms of the actual riff.
Right.
This is Manet's Luncheon on the Grass. So I want to just want you to start give us a really idea about how this work came about. I have a lot of specific questions about how the shoot went, but give us your introduction to Cousins at Pussy Pond.
Well, it's called Cousins at Pussy's Pond because actually I do a lot of research when I do these works, and in particular with this one, I found out that Manet took the composition from I think it was a 3rd century Roman sarcophagus called the River Gods. Mm-hmm. So that's where my sort of initial inspiration came from. And I have a home out in the Springs, which is like out in the Hamptons near Amagansett. And I decided to use that as the location for it. And the place is actually called Pussy's Pond. I did not make up this name. And I wanted to recreate that. Because the thing is with art history, and when I was studying it as an undergrad, even at Syracuse, and I did a semester abroad in Florence, obviously people of color are, you know, not mentioned because unfortunately, I say Black folks, we have a very, very bad PR department. So we don't get, you know, our stuff out there. So nobody learns about it. And then you're inundated with all of this European art and you're told this is like the best stuff ever. And I'm like, well, I don't know. You know, until I see somebody that starts looking like me, it's a little, you know, more difficult for me to relate to. So I wanted to create imagery around just that simple notion of seeing people that look like me and functioning in these sort of environments. And like I said earlier, once you do the research, you find out where they got the inspiration from. And then I took it back to that.
Well, what do you think it does to put a naked Black woman in this situation? Now, first of all, the original was naked Black woman.
His is, you know, déjeuner sur l'herbe, you know, lunch on the grass.
Yeah.
So I'm following that lead as well. And then what I did is, okay, the two guys are dressed, but these two guys were like, you know, amazing bodies. And it was like, I'm going to put my own flavor into it. And I sort of fancied them as warriors in a way. And that was that. And it's nude, but you don't see anything. So it's extremely subtle. It's like, it's probably even more, you see more breast on, you know, the Manet one than you do on mine.
Right, exactly. And of course, Manet's was a scandal. And I don't think yours was necessarily a scandal, but it makes you think about these absences in art history that you see. It made you think about how we even see a canonical image like Manet. And Manet's image wasn't canonical in the beginning. It was a scandal and people hated it. Right. So it kind of turns everything up on its head.
Right. And I was fascinated too, that because I know that he looked at the river gods. He looked at that sarcophagus. So it's like, you know.
So it's funny because this is the dangers of of curators coming in and interpreting things. Because of course, when I was giving tours of the exhibition, I was thinking of these young men with the fabulous physiques and the spears as kind of a African or pseudo kind of kitschy African warrior kind of nod. Now that's not what your intention is, but when you put it in the context of modernism and modernism's debt to African art, there are other things. You start thinking about how Africa might underpin and certain aspects of modernism, whether or not it had anything to do with Manet.
Right.
But that is the discussion that goes on in the entire exhibition. So as curators, we take the prerogative to be absolutely wrong or or just creative. I'd like to think of it as creative sort of thinking.
No, I mean, and I think you should. I mean, I think once it leaves my studio, it's up for discussion. It's up for debate. Mm-hmm. You know what I'm saying? I can always tell people what, you know, my thinking and what my rationale was behind it, but they're going to interpret it the way that they see fit. Yeah.
Yes, and a lot of people coming into the show, the ones that we were able to converse with during those first glorious 2 weeks, were very much taken by it and taken by the attitude of the man in the center, you know, the kind of fierce attitude, and then your very casual glance.
Right, blase.
Yeah, like I do this all the time.
Exactly. This is what we do.
So I wanted to ask you, and having said that this is a Colescott piece, and again, I said in this gallery, because your work is in dialogue with these works, there are several different pieces that address the same thing, but were you at all influenced by Colescott, who was doing this kind of thing a few years earlier?
No, not on this particular piece. Mm-hmm. Not on this particular piece. I mean, I'm like familiar, you know, with his crossing of the Delaware and whatnot. But actually, this is like the first time that I'm seeing this one.
Oh, it's not funny.
Yeah.
You know, you're probably right. This was not as famous as others. And we got this we were lucky to get this loan from a private collection. So I don't think that this was out in the public sphere as much. But
what it goes to this one.
Yeah. And this is called Sunday Afternoon with Joaquin Murrieta. And he's like a old California bandito, if you will, or a almost like mythical figure, a bandit in California. And so it's interesting that he's there with this Black woman. I won't say she's African American. She might be a Black Mexican woman, right? Old California. And just, Colescott is all into all kinds of racial and sexual dynamics. Right. Yeah. So, but I just wondered whether or not he was in your mind. Now, in the a gallery where your piece is, we have several other works, and I just wanted to point out through the door in the back, through the side door in the gallery that's in the back is Faith Ringgold's Picasso studio, where she is fashions herself as the reclining nude in front of Picasso. And so there's so many dialogues going on in this show that we didn't even know were going to happen, but I tried to make sure that these things happen even through the doorways and things. And of course, you're next to Ayanna V. Jackson, who's, I would say, someone who's definitely been looking at your work and sort of indebted and to the pioneering work that you've done in this. As well as in that gallery, we had Mickalene Thomas. All three of you are doing this work with Black female bodies. And one of the things I was thinking about in terms of the way your work may have influenced them is just the skin, issues of skin color and the beauty of the brown skin color. What do you think when you see these artists following in your footsteps?
I mean, I like it, right? When somebody, being an artist, it's like you want people to be touched by the work that you're doing. So, what is that saying? Like, the greatest compliment is, not the imitation, but the inspiration is how I would put it. Mm-hmm. In the same way that I felt when I saw Betty Saar's Liberation of Aunt Jemima and Uncle Ben. It inspired me to do my own piece in my superhero series, Rajay.
Oh, okay.
And, it's completely different from, Betty's interpretation of it. But the title just set something off in me in terms of how I saw it visually, that I needed to release these people from their boxes because they did not own the company. And I was just like, what the hell? Why are they on the box? This is like crazy, And finally, 22 years later, they have been released. So, but you know what I'm saying? And they did their own thing with it. I mean, instead of using the two guys, they used the two women, you know what I'm saying? So it's sort of like they're doing their own interpretation of it, for their time, for their, sexuality, for, all the things that are important in their life situation right now.
Yeah.
So, that's great. And for me, that's what art should be. Should be the sort of continuum. And
it does.
Like great pieces, it's I think the discourse, it's nice when it kind of continues and we see another, interpretation of it, another way of looking at it.
Right, and for this exhibition about Riffs and Relations, right? It's not only the relationships between the European artists and the African American artists. It's about the relationships among the African American artists, right. Almost as much. And this is sort of proof in the pudding.
Right.
And then everyone's work though is toward a different end.
Exactly. Exactly.
But I was so happy to. One of the goals was to be able to show that what we see with Mickalene or anybody doing the work in the last 5 years has a history to it.
Right.
So.
No, and the lineage is like that. It's important to be able to see that line.
Yeah.
I think,
So we are very,
especially since when I did it, nobody was doing it. So I'm like, okay, that's cool. Yeah.
Yeah, no question.
I can lead the road, I can lead the charge on it.
Yeah.
So, for me, that for my ego, which I basically try to keep at bay, but it's, oh, that's nice. That feels good. You know what I'm saying?
So this piece was a part of this American Family series where you continued to raid art. Well, before we go to that, okay, one of the things that I was so thrilled about having this exhibition, and it didn't occur to me till we installed it, was how these works work together in ways that I wasn't expecting.
Mm.
So, like we had works that were definitely paired up. For instance, the beautiful Matisse sculpture in the center of the room, the reclining nude, large seated nude, is in dialogue, of course, with Emma Amos is in dialogue with that. She's in the back corner, right? You see her quoting it. We have Titus Kaphar on the right-hand side, the very large piece pushing back the light is quoting a Monet, which is the original, if you will. The source is on the other side. So we were lucky to get these all in the same room. But then when these kittens come in the room together, they start dancing with other partners, right? So the catlet starts to have a conversation with the Matisse. And the catlet is having a conversation with your piece, in my mind, the beautiful colors, the reclining nude. And this was not in my mind at all. But when you start, I guess if you carefully curate things that seem to be wound around the same, I'm tooting my horn now. Maybe they come up with this, but I was thrilled to see the way the resonances that held up, even with your piece as opposed to the Matisse in the middle. And then Matisse is really steeped in his interest in European and African art, etc. But the way she's reclining is a little bit more submissive to the way you're seated more erect, as the way all the other Black women are seated. So it's kind of interesting the way women
I like to use the gaze too. That's the other thing. I mean, I think in all of my early work and even now, I always return the gaze because for me, it's like I'm not doing this for, say, the Caucasian audience to like just look at me. Mm-hmm. It's like you can look at me, but I'm looking back at you too. Yeah.
Yeah. Exactly. And
for me, that is the all powerful move. Mm-hmm. Is that the gaze is returned. I am not, even though you may want to objectify me, fine, go ahead, whatever. I can't prevent that, but I'm not necessarily going there. I am not complicit with what you may want to do. That's why I'm looking back at you. Mm-hmm. And I have that sort of attitude of like, it's like blasé, but it's like, it's sort of like, don't cross me.
Yeah.
Okay. Just like they have those two spears back there.
Yeah. Right.
Not cross me in this space.
Don't cross
me. Right now I'm owning this space. And I'm relaxed about it too.
Yeah.
Not anxious at all.
And I think that is one of your gifts to many of the other women artists who've come back to unafraid, unabashedly own it.
Right.
And serve it back up.
Exactly.
And so
if it was a doctrine, I would say that should be a doctrine. You know what I'm saying? Like, just, do it like that. There's no fear. There's no fear. Fear. You don't have to be holding your eyes down or not looking or whatever, And this one, I mean, obviously, the Odalisque, she doesn't have the gaze. So in taking that revisionist look, obviously you're getting her profile. That's it.
Yeah, I put in this one.
Right.
Because that's the source, I guess. But the Ang. And I was wondering, you lived in Paris for a couple of years, right?
Yep.
And so several of these works are in French museums, major, these are major works. It would have been in reproductions anyway. But did you first encounter them in Paris? Like the Déjeuner and the...
Yeah, I definitely, like I told you, I'd studied, I did like a semester abroad in Florence and whatnot, and I was going up to Paris and whatnot, to the Louvre and so on, and, So, yeah, I was definitely exposed to them, for sure. Yeah. And, in Art History 101.
Art History. So these are some of the other sort of riffs, if you will.
What I even say, I'll even go as far as to say, one of the strategies, I found as a Black artist was to go into the art history book, 101 art history, and to mine that. Yeah. Because it's so funny because Caucasians just love to see that. Yeah. They're like, oh my God, it's like Ings. Oh, it's Manet. Oh, it's, you did like an Olympia. Oh, it's the Last Supper. And then I put my twist on it.
Yeah.
That's it. But it makes them already sort of susceptible to seeing it because they're seeing themselves, so to speak. In the way that Kehinde, used it as well. Kehinde Wiley with his paintings.
It
holding
definitely draws
and
people
you just flip the script. That's all.
Yeah. So,
I mean, it's a mode of, what do I want to say, like, of working. I mean, it's almost too easy in a way. Yeah.
Yeah. It's almost too easy. Just like, the last one, this one, is the last sort of riff, I guess I'm going to put up here, is the Olympia's Boys. Now, did you get some kind of pushback against your take on Olympia?
No, I didn't get any pushback. I mean, what I was concerned with was, I didn't like the little, servant, the maid there that's serving, giving her the flowers. So what I did was to extract the flower giving and just did a torso of myself with the flowers, which was actually in, I think, what was it, Denise Merrill show that she did on, recently, at Columbia and then at D'Orsay.
Yes.
And in the New York version, they actually had that piece, which I call like the extraction, and I call it American Beauty. And with this one, Olympia's Boys, I wanted to bring in my two sons. And again, almost in the same way as Déjeuner sur l'herbe, as sort of like my protectors in a way, if you want.
Oh,
yeah.
So this was from the American Family series, and right. I'm gonna move on just to go, to look at a few other things that have been sort of highlights or important parts. Oh, this actually is also from the American Family.
That's also from it too.
So tell me how this one fits in, and I just love the way the way you've got the skin is folded in such a decorative and beautiful way.
Right, and the most important thing for me is the locks.
Yeah, the locks.
The locks are what I would say is like the more unexpected thing. Mm-hmm. I mean, American Family for me at the time when I did it, it was like that transitional point of like where women are getting older. And I started also having these feelings of like, is there going to be some sort of invisibility that's going to happen, as I get older in terms of, are you noticed anymore? Are you desirable? You know what I'm saying? Which was at that time was important to me. Now I kind of look at it and I go, wow, that was like, your ego was like kind of like out of control there and so on and so forth. So I've like sort of pushed past all of that nonsense in a way, but this was part of that, that sexuality.
Yeah.
So, and also, just the fetish idea of it as well. I mean, like how far do you go? Now everybody's wearing waist trainers. Yeah. You know what I'm saying? And it's like to have the big butt and so on. And that configuration of, the female body. So, that played into it as well.
Yeah, it's interesting that you say that you were feeling older, and now I look at these and I think, oh my gosh, you look so young. And
but I mean, I look at them now and I go, wow, yeah, I was.
What was I thinking?
Right.
Okay, so
this transition,
Yeah, it is a transition. So I just wanted to show everybody how big these works are and how they work in a space, because that's important.
Olympia's Boys, for instance, I think that was like 13 feet or something like that. It's on 4 aluminum panels to make up that piece. And the other ones are about like 48 by 60s, I think.
Mm-hmm. So
so they're larger than life.
Beautiful.
And scale is important for me too, because the thing is, it's like, I feel a lot of times, a lot of imagery that we see of, Black folks it tends, before I started doing scale, it was, kind of small. It didn't have the impact. I like to say like, okay, you're going to see this. This is going to sort of conk you over the head when you see it, and God forbid it should fall off of the wall. It'd probably kill you. So.
Yeah, and others have employed that, like you mentioned, Kehinde Wiley. I mean, the size there.
Right. No, scale is important because, scale dominates. And I mean, having lived in Europe and, going to people's, chateaus or whatever, one thing I always noticed was like, they would have like a giant oil painting, maybe it's like 8 feet or something like that, top to bottom. of, you know, whatever, one of their ancestors. And I'm like, well, that's great, because if you grow up in that kind of environment, obviously you feel entitled. Obviously, you know that you're a landowner. And, you know, you're supposed to have what you have. And then I would say you go into some Black folks' home, and if they're really upscale, maybe they have a grand piano and they have some, you know, small 8x10s framed in silver or gold frames, you know, nice, but certainly not giving that sort of positioning to their ancestors.
Right.
So that was another thing for me, that when I lived in Europe, I saw that a lot. And I was like, well, shit, yeah. Like, if I grew up with that, you know, definitely I'm like a landowner. Definitely I'm entitled. Mm-hmm. Definitely I'm supposed to have all that I have and more.
Yeah.
Well, except I don't think I would have killed everybody to get it. But
well, that especially, well, entitled, that takes me to the next sort of little controversy here. And being, as a woman, Black woman, you're entitled to portray yourself as Jesus in the Last Supper. But as Renee Maurer mentioned, there was a little bit of controversy around this.
There's a lot of controversy around that.
Yeah.
It's amazing. Okay. Originally, I showed it in Venice, okay, at the Biennial, and offsite in a decommissioned church. And the Italians, like, they loved it. They were like, okay, this is great. You know, there was no issue. There was no riots, nothing, right? Then it came to New York, and it went to the Brooklyn Museum. And then Giuliani went off on it and said I was anti-Catholic and all this other stuff. And I was like, wait a second, how are you calling me anti-Catholic when there's that commandment called thou shalt not commit adultery, and have my wife crying all over Fox 5, you know, about him? And so I was just like, you know, it was just so like hypocritical. And the reason that I'm nude is just simply because, okay, I have a history in fashion, and to be nude for me is the purest thing that I can do, right? I don't see anything sexual about it. I just see a female nude standing there, you know, with her arms extended, you know, to bring in, you know, people, whatever, to this philosophy or whatever it may be. And there's no accoutrement to judge me and to say, well, she's this or she's that, or she's into this or she's into that. Yeah. Yeah. So that was the reason for her being nude. And then Judas is to her, what is it, her right, you know, who's like the white guy in there. And that to me was, and the other thing too is like I went to Catholic school, like as a kid. And I had a Jesuit who's like, you know, the smarter people of Catholicism. And he was like, you know, we're created in the likeness of, you know, Jesus as God. So that made perfect sense to me, even though they keep putting out all this propaganda that the man had chestnut blonde hair and blue eyes, you know, but that's their way of saying that he looked like them. And I was like, okay, well then this God looks like me, and this God is a woman. And when we look at, you know, spirituality and religion, way back, it was always about the goddess. It was always about the woman. I mean, it wasn't about the man. Mm-hmm. And religion to me is just just a form to control people, because it's man-made and it doesn't have anything to do with spirituality and a way of living.
Yeah, and
it's about oppressing people and keeping people in line. But when you look at all of the spiritual leaders, from Buddha to Abraham to Jesus to, you know, Confucius, they all had the same message, which was to, you know, to love your neighbor, to love yourself. Like, I saw this interview with the Dalai Lama, and he said, he goes, the most striking thing about going to America was that, he said, I met people that didn't like themselves. He said, like, how is that possible that one does not like themselves? And I'm like, you know, my response to that is, yeah, it's possible. Look, you know, look at all the mayhem, wars, killing, genocide, and everything else that's happened over the centuries. That's what happens when people don't like themselves. They go crazy.
Well, speaking of love, and I just want to get through a little bit more of this, because we could just go all night long.
Yeah,
but
we could.
I thought that, I mean, clearly, obviously, the response to this was just racist, and part of the culture wars that were just raging at the time.
Right.
Nowadays, I don't think it would be.
Korean culture wars. I mean, I did like talks with William Donahue from the Catholic League. You know what I'm saying? So when we're on TV, it's like, you know, it's that Fox 5 thing. It's like, wah, 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 wah,
Oh yeah,
know?
like I have this. I put this
right.
in. Yeah.
All of this like craziness. Meantime, afterwards, he's like, oh, so what's your next exhibition? Are you going to be nude in that? Like, you know, it was like, maybe we can have drinks. You know what I'm saying? It was just such bullshit. Yeah.
That's crazy.
Yeah. And then Cardinal Egan calling me pathetic. I'm like, pathetic. And what I had said to the Daily News when they called me on his comment, I said, what about him protecting all those nasty priests up in Boston who were molesting those little altar boards? Oh, no, we can't say that now. We can't say that now. A year later, what did they say? Yeah. It came to light. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, I mean, these people, they don't need to, like, really talk a lot, because as soon as you lift just, like, one veil, a lot of nasty stuff comes out. And at the time for New York, this was a time when everybody thought Rudy Giuliani was just, like, a piece of, like, crap. You know, he had put that ad, and that's a time where he's, like, enforcing, you know, all this stuff with the police and everything. And, you know, it was just not a great time. So somebody can say something. And the fact that his divorce was like so open, and he was so openly with the other woman and whatnot.
Well, what goes around comes around, doesn't it?
True.
That's all I'll say about that. I thought it would be nice, just now that we're getting almost a little close to when we have to stop, but we still have some time. I thought it would be good to change up and look at your Discrete Charms of the Bougies series, just a few of these pieces, because it started in 2008 and you continued on. And and
it will continue on.
And so it's not over. So this is your the filmmaker in you coming out. And also,
ongoing. I mean, you know, it was my life. I was living in Chappaqua, you know, New York, where the Clintons live. It's very, you know, Caucasian and whatnot. And I just wanted to sort of represent that, and also wanted to speak about sort of mental illness, if you want, on some level of depression. And what this character, right, her name is Missy, and kind of like what she's going through. She's very privileged, and she has all that she could possibly need. And the thing was, too, is that, like, if a Black woman has some sort of issue going on mentally, usually she's, like, in a crack house, and, you know, she's got crusty snot coming out of her nose, and she looks like a big mess. And when you would see, like, say, the Valley of the Dolls, which was definitely an inspiration, you know, she's, like, you know, at the Betty Ford Center, you know, she's in the pool, she's just chilling, even though she has all of these horrible thoughts going on in her head and blah, 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 blah. So I wanted to create imagery around that, saying that, you know, you could have these issues, you could have a dependency on, say, alcohol or whatever. You could want to kill your husband, but you're going to do it in the most elegant, chicest way possible. You know, and you're going to look good doing it too.
Yes.
Yeah.
That red dress is a killer.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then, so she, this is a bigger series, but she goes through this drama. She's depressed. She's alcoholic.
It's really a journey, because at the end of the series, she becomes enlightened.
Yeah. So here she is in Ghana. I think.
She's in Ghana.
She runs away from the police, I guess.
Yeah. Well, first she escapes to Beijing. If you look at the whole series, and if anybody's interested, you can go to my website and you can see the whole series. And then this one, she's getting closer to her enlightenment, but she's not quite there yet. So she's in Busua in Ghana, actually, on that photograph.
And gone are all the fancy clothes.
Yeah. But she's, you know, she's like, it's like that thing of being lost. So it doesn't matter where you are in the world, you're still carrying this weight with you.
Yeah. And then in 2015, those were all from 2008, you came back to it.
Right. And then this one, this is in Peru, on the Pan American Highway.
Oh.
And so at this point, she's, enlightened, and she's shrugged off all of that baggage that she's been carrying. And, she realizes that the only person that needs to validate her is herself. Mm-hmm. And she's now taken on a whole new, light and vibration and whatnot. Mm-hmm. And, and basically that's my story. And this shot is funny because it's like, I was with my son. So what I do when I do this, I set the shot up and I shoot my son, right? And the exact position and everything. And then we switch places so that he can just click and get the shot of me. And when I came back into the shot, because I was losing light pretty quickly, he's like, "Oh, you're too black. I can't see you now." So I was like, "Excuse me." I said, "Give me my phone." So what I'm doing there is I'm actually lighting myself with my phone.
I see.
Now,
and it's really a cool picture.
Right.
So
that's what I call self-illumination. Mm-hmm.
Well, tonight is debate night in America. So
right.
I thought it would be a nice time to talk about this fairly recent work, The Signing, and set this up for us because this is fascinating to me.
Well, the thing was with The Signing was that, obviously having gone on my own little spiritual journey, okay, I had kind of moved away from my revisionist look. And then I felt, because Trump got elected, and I was just like, oh my God, like, I'm gonna have to leave the country. This is like crazy, This is the same guy that wanted the Central Park 5 lynched in, Times Square, basically, after putting that ad in. I have to have some kind of response to this. And then I decided to, go back to my roots, so to speak, and decided that the Constitution needed to be rewritten, and it needed to be rewritten by people of color. And so taking people that might have been in the past of color to present day, to people that may have like sort of African roots, surrealist roots, everybody together, which on another side is a belief that I have that I think in this country, in order to really make a change, perhaps Black people need to come together and consolidate into, like I say, a Black political party where we can begin to treat politicians, like the lobbyists and so on. And the way that the mechanism works in this country, to be able to say to people, look, we can guarantee you 30 million votes, but this is what we need to happen. You cannot go into our communities and be shooting our youth every week. This is not acceptable, and it stops right now. And these people who are responsible for that will be punished and dealt with. So I think that's, for me, the only way that there's going to be a change, a real change, if we can do that. Or then, unfortunately, the other change, and what all revolutions have had historically, they were violent. French Revolution, very violent. That's when they came up with the guillotine and everything, right? Make no mistake, American Revolution, violent. Russian Revolution, violent. So I don't know, being somebody that appreciates peace, and I don't own any firearms, I think the only other way is to create a political party that represents our needs in our communities.
Yeah, so you based it on this famous painting that's now in the Capitol building.
Right.
But this painting was done in 1940, just to let everybody know, not the 18th century when the thing would have happened. And then you added all of these different people that you knew. And
right.
Did they do their own costumes? And I see you're in the place of George Washington.
Right.
Did they do their own costumes?
It was like a major production. I mean, at the time, I would say to you, that was like my biggest production of bringing all these people together. No, some of the costumes are rented. There's some of the costumes were like used like in Hamilton and stuff like that. And I had to rent them. Some of them, like the blue man that was in front, is actually from Morocco, from the blue
Uh-oh,
men.
sorry.
I was saying on the
I'm sorry.
oh,
I have,
jumped ahead.
yeah, jumped ahead. Okay.
All right, no, I was saying like the blue outfit that's in the front, that is from the Blue Man ethnic group in Morocco and whatnot. So they're coming from like all over, but it was a major production,
Yeah.
and no, they didn't, we put together all the components of it. I worked with a very good friend of mine, Rico Martinez, and we just put it together like that.
Okay. See, I have screwed this one up. All right. I just showing people some of the costumes there.
Right. Like this guy, Bo McCall, that is actually his costume. And his image is actually right now at Columbia University's Warwick Gallery for the triennial, the Uptown show.
Okay.
And then next to him is Solio. And that is a, rented costume.
Mm-hmm. That's fantastic.
Right.
And the last thing, I know we're running out of
time. FYI is made out of CDs.
Yeah. I was wondering about that.
Yeah, it's all CDs.
The last thing, when we're kind of running out of time because we wanted to take questions, but I want to at least, we see you shot Nick Cave for the New York Times Style magazine, but I wanted to show 2 minutes of your video based on your new work.
Please do.
Good evening. This is the voice of the goddess. In the next 10 minutes, we will take you with us into another world, into the world of music, spirit, and meditation. Turn off your mind and take a deep breath and relax. Let the rhythm be your guiding light.
So that will tantalize everyone to perhaps.
I think it's on Venmo. It's on Venmo. Renee Cox, Sacred Geometry.
Yes, and I'm just going to flash through these because we are at time. Renee? Do we have questions before I? We don't have questions, so we're going to continue then for the next 2 minutes. So you can talk to us about this series and how it came to be, because there's a video, and that helps to animate what we're going to see in these other images.
Soul culture basically came to me after I began to understand how to be happy and how to rid myself of the negative thinking that we're all sort of involved with. Because our society wants us to think like that, because it propels like the whole capitalist notion. And I found that through the teachings and the readings of, Eckhart Tolle, which resonated for me. But I mean, obviously there are other people, you know, that talk about the same exact thing. So that was the one that spoke to me the most. And that was the one that I understood the most. And he's basically like, if you're, you know, getting that little undermining voice in your head that's saying that you're not worthy and that, you know, you're, you know, a bad person or this or that, to realize that it's coming from your egoic mind. And how to get rid of that is, one, being the witness of that thought, of every thought that comes through that's negative like that, until you get to a point of where you have what they call in spiritual circles a place of no thought. Mm-hmm. And these images are created in that space. Because if one were to sit there and think about this and calculate this, you wouldn't get this. You wouldn't even do it. You know what I'm saying? Because you'd be like, well, I don't know where the reference is for this and how many do I have there and yada, 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 yada. And I just let all of that stuff go. There is no algorithm. I start from what I call my portraiture series that I've done from high school, basically meaning I'm shooting my images on a black velvet background. I have my subjects. I isolate body parts that I want to show, and the rest I'll cover them up with velvet so that I'm able to create really interesting shapes with the body. And then for this particular series, then I took it to, you know, Photoshop. And then from Photoshop, I took it to actually hand cutting pieces and creating a total, what I call portrait, made up of lots of other people. It really speaks to sacred geometry, and it speaks to fractals, something that I became very, very interested in. I'm still interested in.
It also looks like mythological beings.
Right.
I mean, like this guy looks kind of like a satyr on the left.
Right.
Right.
And everything that you see there is a human.
Yeah.
There's no, like, you know, sort of non-human design aspects. I mean, when you look closely at it, you see it's him, you know, with his arms like behind his head, making those antlers.
Making the antlers, yes.
Yeah.
And then this other woman is very sort of spider-like.
Exactly.
Yeah. And I just find these fantastic. Now, I was particularly interested in how you got Carrie James Marshall in there.
Yeah. Exactly.
And then this the man on the right, is this someone I should know? I mean, this is a public figure like Carrie James Marshall?
No, he's just, I mean, he's a great guy, you know what I'm saying? No, he's not well known in that, like, kind of capacity.
Right.
Yeah.
And what these both reminded me of, I don't know if you've been watching Lovecraft Country.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, now, recently, yes.
Recently, yeah, of course, you did this before Lovecraft, but those beasts in Lovecraft Country are really coming, I feel like they're coming out of this somehow, I don't know.
Right.
So
it definitely has the similarities. I mean, some of them I called them, like, you know, monsters, you know what I'm saying, just for the sake of it. But for me, it was about creating this other world,
right?
You know, and what would that other world look like? You know, what could it look like? You know? So that was one of the things that really was a big concern for me, which was like, what happens when I begin to create like my own world of my own people of color, and like, how do we evolve? And obviously, I mean, I was influenced a lot, I would say, by Hindu art, psychedelic art, you know, Buddhist art as well, and just letting it rip and not holding myself back at all.
Yeah. Did you have a question, Renee?
Oh, I was just going to refer to what's on the chat. We have a question from Jackie. She asks for you to provide a little bit more of your biography, Renee. What took you to Europe, and why did you return to New York?
Well, what took me to Europe is I married a Frenchman, so basically.
Good reason.
And so I got married to him. I mean, I met him in college, just like my mother said I would. My mother's like, you got to meet your husband in college. And I was like, what are you talking about? I'm not going to get an MRS, blah, blah, blah. And well, lo and behold, I met him in college, and he had to go back to France at that time to do mandatory military service. And we moved to France for like 2.5 years. So I lived there, and that was that. And the first year I absolutely hated it. And then after that, I adjusted it and I liked it. But my husband's very organized, so he made arrangements and got a job to come back to New York. So.
We have a question from Demo for Renee. The demo asked, you spoke a lot about things concerning the spiritual. And the question is, did you come to the spiritual through experience in a linear way or through certain times and spaces?
Well, I like to say, I came to it when I got tired of suffering. So, sort of like they say, when you've suffered enough, that's when you become interested in this other way of, sort of spirituality. And you're open to understanding it. Until that point, people are not necessarily receptive to it, I would venture to say. And even myself, I wasn't, initially. It wasn't until I found myself, and this will sound very cliche, in Bali, in a beautiful hotel by myself, the first person to ever stay in this room, with a butler too, and just feeling sorry for myself, feeling sorry for the little me. Oh, how come you don't have a book out? Oh, whoa, why haven't you had a retrospective? All of this crap, and just feeling sorry for me. And if I had a gun, I probably would have shot myself in that moment. But a friend of mine had suggested that I listen to Eckhart Tolle's book, Living the Liberated Life and Dealing with the Pain Body. And I put that on. And for some reason at that point, if anybody's familiar with Eckhart Tolle, he speaks very, very slowly and very deliberately. It was very soothing, and it calmed me down. And he said the most pivotal thing for me, which I mentioned before, was, he goes, why are you waiting for the world to validate you? The world is crazy. Pick up a history book, turn on the news. You're asking crazy people to validate you. What are you doing? And it was my big aha moment. To the extent of when I came back from Bali, 10 days after hearing that, my husband thought I had joined a cult or something, because I couldn't deal with him complaining, and which is like the French national pastime. I was just like, you can't complain. If you're going to complain, then you have to complain to the person that can make the change. But just complaining to me or anybody else that can't change the fact that Metro North has ugly people writing on it is useless. So
That's
yeah. So, that was, and it was profound. And that changed my work that you see now with soul culture, that allowed me to enter into this space where I just felt I could find joy, and it was playful and it was exciting. Because when I make these pieces, I don't know where they're going, and I don't have an issue with that. It's part of the journey, and that's what's fun. And I think people sometimes forget about that aspect of fun. They look down upon fun. And I'm like, but no, that's where the joy comes from. That's what makes you whole. That's what makes you human. That's what makes you, be nice to other people and stuff. And I think that's the way the world should turn, basically.
Renee, the image on the slide with the gold background, is that the same image that's behind you in your studio?
Yes, it is.
And do you want to talk to our audience about how it came to be and how it was made?
Well, there's the one on the left is what I call the flat version. Okay, it's not three-dimensional. It's just simply a photograph. And then from that point, then I started printing at various sizes, parts of that image. And then I went in and I started hand cutting and collaging and reconfiguring it, basically, and created another version. So if you're looking at fractals, you have one iteration, and you can have like an infinite amount of iterations of the same image. So it comes from that, basically.
Yeah.
And I wanted to make something that would, have a little bit more scale. This one behind me is like 7 feet tall. So, and the photograph on, the side, I mean, it could be 7 feet too, but it, it's different. It just resonates differently, I feel.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, well, we are basically at our 6:30 time. Are there any more comments or anything, Renee? No? Well, I have
the other Renee, I'm like going, I don't know.
I can't hear you.
We have another question about the facial expression of the figure in Cousins at Pussy Pond. And if you could go into that, Renee.
Well, I don't know. I think I kind of addressed it before, She's, she's just there, and she's owning where she is, and she's taking no prisoners, and, that's it. Take it or leave it. Either you love her or you hate her, whatever. Mm-hmm. It doesn't matter. You know what I mean? So that's why she kind of has that sort of blasé look, She knows she's all of that in a bag of chips, so she doesn't need anybody to, again, validate her. So.
I had a question about your interaction with Spike Lee.
Uh-huh.
And if you could talk about that.
With Spike, at that time I was doing fashion, and the art director at Essence, this guy Gregory Gray at the time, introduced me to Spike, and he was doing his School Days poster, so he asked me to do it, and we did it. I came up with a concept literally on a napkin as to what it should look like, and we went into the studio and executed it, and it was like the only time I could get all those people there together at that time, because this is before computers and whatnot, was like we started to shoot at midnight, and we went until about 7 o'clock in the morning and got it. And, that was that. And, I was an admirer of what he had done with, She's Got to Have It, and School Days too. So.
Well, I want to thank you, Renee, for having this conversation with me tonight. You were foundational to this exhibition, and I contacted you early, and you said yes, and I figured, okay, if she said yes, we're off and running. We can do it.
All right.
And I really appreciate your participation. And thank you, Renee Maurer, obviously, for working with me and facilitating tonight, and everyone else who's here tonight. I really appreciate your support of Riffs and Relations, and there'll be more programming, and one of these days you might even be able to walk through the door. So stay tuned for that. Anything else, Renee?
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Renee. Thank you, Adrienne. And we look forward to seeing you at the museum very soon. Thank you. Enjoy your evening.
Good night.
Yeah, watch the debate.
Yes.
Take care. Thank you.
Thank you.